Hi, everybody. Jules Shore from IPNB Psychotherapy of Austin, here with Kim May, who runs Substance Use Therapy Austin. And I wanted to talk to her today because, one, we're heading into 4th of July weekend. Yay, celebrate however we can in the midst of all of this. And substances are often a part of celebrations and holidays. And I'm also noticing that in the time of COVID, a lot of our substance use is going up a little bit. So I thought it'd be a good time to have a conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Kim, and talk to you guys about harm reduction. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank
Yay.
you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell us, what is harm reduction?
Such a big question.
Totally.
So yeah, it's huge. Harm reduction kind of got started around the 70s, I believe in the Netherlands, as a response to the HIV crisis. Essentially, what harm reduction does is try to, very simply, reduce harms associated with lifestyle. So whether that's sex, whether that's drugs, it's really, rather than focusing on a particular behavior, the focus becomes on shifting actions around the behavior to make the behavior safer. So harm reduction can be a public policy. Probably one of the most successful ones that we don't think of as harm reduction is designated drivers.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh my God, you're right. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, most people don't.
Yeah.
The cool thing about the designated driver thing, it doesn't assume that people won't drink. It doesn't tell you to drink less. The implication is you do you.
Yeah.
And then just have someone drive you home after. It's a brilliant example of how, as a society, we can make these really common sense strides to make our use safer. Harm reduction can comprise things like needle exchange or handing out condoms. Around the 90s, there started to be this movement to really implement harm reduction beyond these sort of grassroots, policy things, and really start to bring it into the treatment model.
Gotcha.
There's a brilliant woman out of San Francisco who literally wrote the book, Harm Reduction Psychotherapy. I call it brilliant because it doesn't go against any of the, training that we receive as clinicians, but it really shows you how to incorporate these harm reduction psychotherapy ideals into the practice. So whether you're a practitioner under the psychodynamic model or using cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever your orientation is, you can also then blend in these kind of harm reduction practices to better support your clients.
How did you decide that harm reduction was the right kind of psychotherapy for you to practice? Why does that fit for you?
Yeah, so I am not a fan of things that are too abstract. I know this might be a little hypocritical coming from a therapist, but I don't like things that are too touchy-feely. I know, right?
Hey, I love all the therapists, and I think we need some that are not too touchy-feely because our clients need some that are not too touchy-feely.
Ultimately, for me, harm reduction is logical. It's tangible, and it fills a much needed gap. My first real exposure to harm reduction was I worked for years at a methadone clinic, which things like methadone or Suboxone are also kind of fit under the harm reduction umbrella. And it just made sense to me. The idea in harm reduction is you meet people where they are and you support them and what their goal is. And
even if their goal is not stopping use.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm having a conversation with my husband this morning. I'm talking to Adam, and we were talking about the fact that I was going to talk to you about this. And he's asking me to define harm reduction, and I'm kind of doing it in very lay language. He goes, wait a second, are you allowed to say that to an addict? Hold on. Which I think is actually a really common thing for people to think.
Totally, totally. We have grown up in the era of most of us, what we know about drug treatment is AA and or NA. And we know about, you know, those residential treatment centers. You know, there's always some celebrity coming in or out of those that people are talking about. They go away for 28 days and problem solved, right? And for some people, absolutely. Harm reduction is really about supporting people's options, right? For AA, for some people, that works brilliantly, and that's exactly the thing that they needed. For other people, that inpatient facility, they needed that break. For other people, it's not so clear cut. A big thing with substance use is that there's a lot of ambivalence, right? And that's true for most of us. Whether we eat too much, whether we're in maybe not so great of a relationship and we know we need to change it, we're in a job that makes us unhappy, there's always a reason to stay and there's always a reason to go. And that discomfort is in the ambivalence. In substance use world, more often than not, ambivalence is viewed as a lack of motivation, or it's viewed as somebody's in denial. When
actually this is just a normal part of the way the brain works.
Absolutely. It means that your brain is smart and capable of seeing two sides of something, and you can accept that life has gray area, because it always does.
This is one of the things, Kim, that I love about your work. For anybody who knows my work, I am in love with complexity and I'm in love with gray. And I think you do such a great job of welcoming gray feeling, gray space into an area of therapy that often we don't think of as having that much gray space.
Right. And I didn't think of it either. Most of us just weren't taught that, even if we went to school for counseling, even if this is our career path. I know I didn't learn this in school.
Yeah, of course.
Most of us just don't have the exposure.
You talk about continuum of use. Like, most of us did not have any exposure to continuum of use. Could you say a little bit about that for anybody who doesn't know? Because I know in grad school, I didn't learn about this.
So most of us have this idea that because alcohol is legal, it's sometimes thought of a little bit differently. So for purposes of this, I'm going to set alcohol aside. Most people have this idea that if you use substances, they do coke, that they see it as a binary thing. You use coke, therefore you are a coke addict and you have a problem. Continuum of use kind of turns that around and says, you know, use isn't this binary, you either use or you do not use. It is a range. So on the one end of the range, you would have maybe complete abstinence. On the far end, you would have this really kind of chronic, persistent, debilitating relationship with a substance. And in between, you have, you know, your social, recreational use, you know, use that's maybe starting to become a little bit problematic, but isn't so out of control. Then you've got maybe where dependence is setting in, and there's a whole range in there. If we treat everybody like they're on only one or the other end of the continuum, then we're neglecting a whole host of experiences and feelings and emotions that are happening in the middle. And so harm reduction, you know, psychotherapy really embraces the idea that you can be in your own individualized place on the continuum, and you can move through it. For some people, their use progresses and it does get worse. For some people, they move a notch or two back on the continuum, and they're not at abstinence, but they're in a better, safer place.
Yeah. And this brings me to, I think, one of the biggest myths about harm reduction psychotherapy is that here's what I hear in the community sometimes is harm reduction psychotherapy, people are against abstinence. And that is not true.
It's not true. It doesn't really make sense. We don't get kickbacks from drug dealers if people keep using, right?
Right.
Harm reduction is not about a particular goal. It's about supporting people in where they are and where they want to go. And for many people, abstinence is the goal. And then we support people to get to that place. It's not about saying that people shouldn't be abstinent. It's about accepting that regardless of what any of us do or say, there are some people who will continue to use both illicit and illicit substances in a way that's harmful to them. Harm reduction just accepts that and works with people where they're at. And honestly, for some people, abstinence is really the only thing that's going to work for them, but they may not be in a place to pursue that. And so it's about making kind of incremental changes over time. But I may have a client who comes in and says, you know, I'm using and it's causing me problems, but I don't know what I want.
Right.
And then I may have somebody coming in that's coming from a treatment program and says, I've been clean, I want to stay clean, I need you to help support my goals for abstinence.
Right.
Harm reduction is about meeting people where they are.
Right. Which is so important. And I think in therapy land, we talk about that in counseling programs all the time, except about this.
Correct.
This actually just matches everything I learned in grad school.
Exactly.
It's so logical.
We talk a big game about, you know, supporting somebody's individualized goals and being person-centered and being strengths-based, except very often we don't apply that to substance use. Yeah.
And I've also heard you talk about how important AA is or especially when it came about, you know, back whenever that was. It came about and it was actually really progressive at the time. What was so different about AA?
Yeah, so AA, you know, kind of came out and said, it's not these people that have this issue aren't problem people. They're people with a problem, right? And so the whole idea was to, you know, develop this thing to kind of support these people and lift people up and kind of reduce that stigma. These aren't people that necessarily need to be locked up in the asylum, right? They have a common issue, and we think we can help support that. And there's a lot of really brilliant things that have come about with AA. I think one of the problems is over time, it's really that kind of abstinence model has really become the only acceptable model, right? Even most inpatient treatment facilities will still base a lot of their programming on AA, which I think is fine, but we need choice, right?
Yeah.
We need choice, and we need different people respond to things differently. You think you go to a doctor and your doctor says you have to lose weight. Right? You have so many options for how you can do that and at what speed you do that and at what works for you. All kinds of different diet changes and exercise regimens. You can make small changes or big changes. And it's not that one is more or less right, it's that what's more or less right for you. Right. And the problem when we operate from a really, really narrow field is we exclude a lot of people who need help. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. It feels so logical.
It is. That's why I love it.
That's why I love it. Yeah. So you also work with family members, with loved ones who have someone who uses substances in their life.
I do.
Yeah. What would be a message for them or for clinicians who work with them? What feels important to you when you're working with family members and loved ones?
You know, compassion, because it's painful. It's a very, very difficult thing to watch someone that you care about, whether it's a spouse, a roommate, a sibling, whatever that relationship is. It's very, very difficult to watch someone do something that brings harm to themselves. It's a painful thing to experience. Because it's painful, it's hard to know what to do, because it seems like so easy, just stop doing this thing. Over the years, there have been, you know, a lot of ideas about this kind of tough love approach, and this notion that people need to hit rock bottom to get better. And I think that that's a really dangerous idea.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that people do not need to hit rock bottom to get better?
Absolutely not.
Yay! I love it. I just want to really highlight that one.
Right. There are people who do hit their version of rock bottom and
for sure
subsequently get better. Sure. But the idea of rock bottom as a goal is dangerous. We wouldn't do that with someone who wasn't managing, say, their diabetes very well. Well, let's let them get real bad, and then maybe
for sure.
People rarely get better when they are alone, and when they're isolated, and when they're disconnected from people that are important to them, and disconnected from their community. The further down you go, the harder it is to come back out of that. Right?
It makes me think about shame, and how shame works in the brain, and how intensely painful. There's plenty of research out there on this that the NIH has done around looking at shame and understanding that physical pain, if I pour hot coffee on my hand, and if I have a shame experience, I feel bad. I feel like I am not worthy of attention, and pull myself out of connection. Because what shame is really is fear of losing connection, fear of unworthiness of staying in community. It actually lights up the same centers in your brain, either way. So it's incredibly painful. But if I have a way of getting rid of pain through use, I can't think of a better way to induce me wanting to use more than me being in a shame state.
Obviously.
Because I'm in pain.
Who among us hasn't been in some kind of physical pain, emotional pain, loneliness, and not thought, like, I know it's going to make this better?
Last night, I poured myself a whiskey in that moment, because I was feeling like, oh, I'm a little lonely, and my hubby had already gone to bed, and I'd worked really late last night. And I was like, well, I'm kind of feeling achy, like in an emotional way. I know, I'll just pour a little thing of whiskey and then I'll go to bed. Same thing.
And so for people who are constantly in that space, but more intensely so, then that drive to continue to do that. And there's this idea that people that use are immoral, or they're bad, or they're this, or they're that, just further drives that stigma, which further drives that shame. The thing is, when you use a substance when you're feeling bad and it makes you feel better, well, now that behavior's been reinforced, right? Something was bad, now it's better, that gets reinforced. And that reinforcement sustains even once people get past the point of the substance still continuing to be helpful or feel good. It doesn't mean that reinforcement system just like, oh, okay, never mind. It doesn't work that way. But most substance use starts out pretty logically.
It does.
We want to feel a different way.
It makes so much sense. I love the way you talk with family members and loved ones about boundaries. Would you be willing to share that a little bit?
Absolutely. Very often when I initially talk with somebody about, you know, kind of setting aside the tough love tactics and stuff, they take that to mean that, you know, just endlessly support somebody no matter what's happening and how bad it is. And that's not what I'm saying. I think rather than kind of implementing this idea of tough love, we implement boundaries. And boundaries should be reflective of what's important to us, our own value systems, our own comfort, our own safety, physical safety and emotional safety. And so when someone is using or drinking, whatever they're doing, and they're doing things that really are violating those things around us that make us feel safe, that is problematic. And that's a good place to kind of implement a boundary. Boundaries should be about, boundaries should be about what you need and not about what you think will change someone else.
Amen. I love this piece. This is so important. Boundaries have nothing to do with whether you love someone or not, and they are not about changing anyone else. Boundaries are about teaching people how it's okay for you to be treated. What is and is not okay for me in this relational space. It's not about changing you.
Right.
And I think that's so misunderstood.
When we make things about what we think will change somebody else, then we become disappointed very quickly.
It turns out I don't have control over that.
It's maddening. And then sometimes that tough love comes from a place of punishment. Right? You didn't change. You didn't do this thing. And so now I'm mad and I'm punishing you.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant quote by somebody who writes very well about kind of the war on drugs and how we got to this place. His quote is, "The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection." And the idea that we don't get better because we simply stop using a substance. We get better because we are fulfilled and we have connection. And in most cases, strong boundaries foster connection.
That's right.
Punishment doesn't.
No. But strong boundaries do. In fact, Brene Brown's most recent research is about this issue, that she was studying altruistic people, people who give a lot, people who are highly compassionate, people who have big connection in their life. And she was wondering, what do they have in common? And she was very surprised to learn that what they have in common is boundaries of steel. And that shocked her. She was not expecting that to be the outcome of her recent forays, but it is, it's true.
Yeah. And the thing is, you know, it doesn't mean people will like your boundaries.
No.
And it doesn't mean setting them and establishing them is easy or there won't be pushback. But it does, if you're consistent in them, people will eventually understand. And they will eventually understand that it's not personal. And they will eventually usually be able to hear things like, I love you, but I can't be around you when you do this because it makes me feel unsafe. Or it's not safe for our children in this state. Has nothing to do with my love for you, my feelings for you, my commitment to you. But during this time, this creates a time of where it's not safe. And over time, most people will eventually understand that. In fact, a lot of people I worked with over the years, especially at the methadone clinic, when they were, you know, kind of getting better, could kind of reflect back on certain things and be like, I see now why I wasn't allowed to be around my little brother. Like I didn't get it then, I get it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you're working, whether it's with a family member or a loved one of someone who's using, or if it's with someone who's using, what I'm hearing is that a large focus of your work is on connection. Opening up to connection. Where's connection in your life? Are you keeping yourself safe enough by having good boundaries to maintain connection? Because connection is the opposite of addiction.
Right. And for people who feel like they don't have it, then we start with focusing on where can we start reducing harm that you're bringing to yourself, that your use is bringing, starting to make things a little bit safer, finding ways, even small ways, to start building that little bit of stability so that people can start to be in a place to be able to reform or form for the first time that connection.
That connection. Yeah, because it's community and that social connection that really is filling us up in a way that can help us through it. Whether it's somebody who's struggling with someone who uses who they're close to, or if it's somebody who's using.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And very often when people come in, they are filled with shame.
Yeah.
And they are lonely.
Nothing brings us out of connection faster than shame. Think about the way shame moves your body, right? It's all about I'm small and I'm out, right?
So it's such an important role for people who work in harm reduction to be sometimes that first or only point of connection.
Yeah.
You know, that voice that says, I see you, I honor your experience, I understand why you like doing these certain substances. I understand they give you something you're not ready to let go of. And then you just shut up and you just listen to people.
Yeah.
And you honor where they are in that moment. Other treatment approaches, some, not all of them certainly, but sometimes the idea is you have to be sober before you can participate.
Right.
Or you can participate as long as you are sober.
Right.
And even someone with the best of intentions, if they're not ready for that, or if they have this slip, then they've lost that connection and then they feel like they've failed.
Right. And that's something harm reduction is taking out of this equation.
You are not failing. You are not failing.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe are not where you want to be yet, but we also embrace any change as positive. Any change, even those little teeny tiny ones.
Yeah, even a change as small as showing up and being willing to contemplate, what is my substance use like? Can I look at it more deeply? Is a change that would be welcomed and embraced and celebrated and supported.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I love harm reduction.
It's amazing.
Oh, I love it.
Amazing.
So, yeah, any tiny harm reduction tip as we end here, any tiny harm reduction tip for the holiday weekend for all our people who are going to go not out, I hope, let's stay in.
Right.
But celebrate anyway. Great. Any tiny little something for people if they want it, and if they don't, they'll leave it here.
Yeah. In general, less is more. You can usually get where you want to be with a little bit less than you might think that you need.
There you go. I love it.
Whatever your substance is.
Wherever it is you want to be.
Just a little less than you think you need, and you'll probably still get where you were trying to get.
I love it. That's brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm so glad, and I hope people enjoy the video and get something out of it and start thinking about substance use in a more complex and broad way.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.